Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This week we are going to continue our discussion on the history of English literature, and we are discussing the 18th century English. In the 18th century, Britain was a powerful country. Even it was as powerful as France at the time. This resulted from the growth of its industries and from the wealth of its large new trading empire. Britain had the strongest navies in the world, and the navy controlled Britain's own trade routes and endangered those of its enemies. Jadi pada 1700-an atau abad ke-18, Inggris itu merupakan salah satu dari dua negara yang sangat kuat di Eropa. Kekuatannya itu sebanding dengan Prancis. Britain mempunyai angkatan laut yang paling kuat di dunia, yang bertugas untuk mengontrol jalur-jalur perdagangan mereka, gitu ya, dan juga berusaha untuk mengalahkan musuh-musuh mereka tentunya ya. Britain became wealthy because of trade. This wealth made possible both an agricultural and industrial revolution, which made Britain the most advanced economy in the world. Ya, karena kekayaan ini, kekuatan tersebut, dan beberapa fasilitas yang mereka miliki, membuat mereka dapat meningkatkan pertumbuhan yang sangat signifikan di bidang pertanian maupun industri. However, there was an enormous price to pay because while a few people became richer, many others lost their land and their way of life. Nah, akan tetapi eh, akibatnya memang tidak hanya yang positif saja. Karena kemajuan ini, maka ada eh, harga yang harus dibayar oleh masyarakat Inggris pada waktu itu. Jadi di mana sebagian dari mereka itu sangat kaya, menjadi sangat kaya, mungkin kekayaannya itu melonjak secara eksponensial. Akan tetapi justru yang miskin menjadi tambah miskin. Kenapa? Karena mereka diakuisisi lahannya. Families were driven off the land in another periods of enclosures. They become the working proletariat. Mereka menjadi kaum kelas pekerja dengan upah yang rendah. Dan mereka tidak mempunyai lahan gitu ya, karena lahannya diakuisisi oleh para pemilik modal. The invention of machinery destroyed old cottage industries and created factories. Nah, penemuan-penemuan mesin uap, khususnya mesin-mesin industri itu menghancurkan industri-industri rumahan, industri-industri tradisional, dan menciptakan pabrik-pabrik dengan mesin yang super besar, dengan mesin uap, dan produksi yang masif. The development of industry led to the sudden growth of cities like Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, and Glasgow. Here is the illustration of the mansion of the industry at the time. This century also saw the change of ruling dynasty. After William and Mary came Mary's sister, Queen Anne. The last of the Stuart who reigned from 1702 until 1714. After the death of Queen Anne, a difficult situation arose. The direct succession to the throne belonged to the line of the deposed James II. His sons and then his grandson, who supported by Jacob, were waiting in France. In order to avoid Stuart succession, jadi seharusnya yang menjadi suksesi itu adalah Stuart, gitu ya, jadi keturunan Stuart. Akan tetapi dihindarilah, gitu ya. The crown was offered to a cousin of Queen Anne, justru ditawarkan kepada sepupu dari Queen Anne, the ruler of small German kingdom of Hanover, who took the throne in 1714 as George I. He was followed by his son George II and his grandson George III. The Hanovers were not a very happy choice, but to attempt to restore the Stuart proved a failure. From now on, the two-party system came into being. Nah, pada era ini ada dua partai yang muncul. Ada the Whigs dan the Tories. Who is the Whig and who is the Tories? You have to do a small research on that. The Whigs represented the financial interests, the cities and towns, and were against any interference of the monarchy in politics. And the second party is Tories, many of them Jacobites, represented the country's squires, and therefore those who favored old tradition. Jadi partai yang pertama itu Whigs namanya, the Whigs, bukan Wings, the Whigs. Yang kedua adalah Tories. The Whigs itu yang apa namanya yang menolak interferensi dari kerajaan, sementara Tories itu yang mewakili kerajaan, kurang lebih seperti itu. The 18th century could also be called as a century of wars. Nah, abad ke-18 itu juga disebut sebagai abad peperangan. From the beginning to the end of the century, the great rival of the enemy was France, ya. Of England was France. At the first, the struggle was for European supremacy. Pertama tuh peperangan mereka itu untuk supremasi Eropa. Tapi by the middle of the century, the struggle was for overseas empire. Untuk kerajaan ya overseas ya, lintas negara, lintas laut. You may look at this one, the illustration here. You see the pink color. The pink color is the line of Britain, England. Ini negara-negara jajahannya ya, yang sekarang menjadi Commonwealth atau persemakmuran. But though it was a century of wars, they were completely different from what we understand by a war in the 20th and 21st centuries. Nah, walaupun peperangan terjadi ya, tapi perang tersebut berbeda dengan perang zaman sekarang ya. These were usually fought by small professional armies, and the daily lives of most people were affected hardly at all. Even when Britain and France were at war, trade and cultural exchanges continued between the two countries. That is the difference. The upper classes and the middle classes in Britain during this age felt more complacent than they had ever felt before or since. They felt that they lived in the best of all possible worlds. Mereka merasakan bahwa mereka hidup di kemungkinan yang paling baik di dunia. This 18th century complacency was partly due to the work of the scientists and philosophers. Kenapa? Ya karena banyaknya penemuan-penemuan, baik itu dari para saintis maupun dari para filosof. Human reason and common sense played such a significant role in the period that it is often called the Age of Reason. Ini juga yang disebut sebagai the Age of Reason. Kalau sebelumnya disebut sebagai the Age or the Neoclassical, the Age of Restoration. Nah, sementara sekarang itu disebut juga sebagai the Age of Reason atau the Enlightenment. The same keyword reason can be found in the definition of the term Enlightenment. The period of the 18th century in Europe when certain thinkers thought that science and use of reason would improve the human condition. The writers and philosophers of this age thought that man was virtuous by nature, and vice was due to ignorance only. So, they started a public movement for enlightening people. In their understanding, this would do away with all evils of society, and social harmony will be achieved. But the 18th century in England was also the age of elegance. What is meant by that? A real civilization superior to the old classical civilization of Greece and Rome, to which the 18th century compared itself, had been achieved at last. Mereka merasakan bahwa mereka sudah melebihi peradaban klasik. Now society, person of position, of course, wealth and the influence, could enjoy it. At the beginning of this period, literature was created for this small society. Pada awal dari periode ini, karya sastra itu ditujukan untuk orang-orang seperti di atas, maksudnya person of position, wealth, and influence, orang-orang kelas atas. Ya. But it was literature that could be read aloud in drawing room, enjoyed in a theater, or discussed in coffee shop, or coffee house, ya coffee shop lah ya, kafe-kafe. The atmosphere of this kind encouraged comedy, satire in verse and prose, pleasant little essays and criticism, but it didn't encourage poetry because the society didn't expect from literature anything private or intimate. However, very soon the situation changed. Nah, selanjutnya situasinya berubah. The middle class, especially women, took to buying and reading books. Nah, pada pertengahan abad ini, kaum kelas menengah juga membaca buku, membaca karya sastra. This fact shows that by the 1770s, the novel had won great popularity. Pada 1770-an, novel mendapatkan popularitasnya. And then, what is the characteristic of the literature at the time? This period saw the rise of political pamphlet and essay, but the leading genre of the Enlightenment became the novel. Ya, pamphlet, essay, akan tetapi yang paling dominan pada era ini adalah novel. The prose style became clear, graceful, and polished. Novel itu sudah mendapatkan bentuk yang utuh seperti sekarang ini, tidak seperti di era-era sebelumnya yang masih berupa baris-baris. Poetry gave way to the prose age of essayists and novelists. The hero of this novel was no longer a prince, but a representative of the middle class. Sentral atau tokoh-tokohnya juga tidak berkutat pada royal family, tetapi juga sudah bergeser ke middle class atau common people, walaupun bukan the lower class juga ya. Literature became very interesting, instructive. Writers tried to teach their readers and what was good and what was bad. Karya sastra menjadi sangat instruktif pada era ini. Para penulis mencoba untuk mengajari pembaca mereka apa yang baik dan apa yang salah. Nah, kemudian secara periodisasi, penulis-penulis pada era Enlightenment ini atau pada era the Age of Reason or the 18th century period itu terbagi menjadi 3 golongan. Yang pertama itu angkatannya Alexander Pope, Daniel Defoe, kemudian Jonathan Swift. Kemudian pada yang kedua, pada pertengahan yaitu ada Samuel Richardson, Henry Fielding, and Tobias Smollett. Dan the last one of this decades or the last decade of the century, they are William Goldsmith, Lawrence Stern, and Richard Sheridan. Okay guys, thank you very much for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.